Hello, my name is Dr. Dave Alton, Marketing Lecturer at University College Cork. I'm delighted to be joined on the Work Talks Tech with the infamous Dr. Pio Fenton, who's the Head of Marketing and International Business at Cork Institute of Technology. Pio, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Dave.
So I suppose to start off, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey from moving from, I suppose you're now the Head of Marketing and International Business in CIT, and you started off doing a PhD in a very, very fascinating topic. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, I think like a lot of 18-year-olds, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do in college, and I ended up at the time following the kind of collective wisdom, which was do computing, there'll always be jobs in it. So this is back in 1997, worked my way through a software development degree basically. Came out of it in 2001 with the dot-com bust and with 9/11 and the world being in a little bit of turmoil at that stage. So I ended up kind of seeking out opportunities within CIT to do a master's at the time, which I then subsequently converted to a PhD. That was in the area of artificial intelligence, which was really before artificial intelligence became the sexy beast that it is now. That's taking over all our lives. So I spent about 4 years working on that. It was using the theory of evolution and genetics to apply to kind of factory floor problems and trying to get jobs done as fast as you possibly could. So that got me up to 2006. I spent a year working on mass spectrometry for chemistry and was beginning to realise that probably I was okay maybe with general topics as well and could transfer kind of skills and knowledge to other areas. So at that point then I managed to get a lecturing job in WIT with an IT focus. And at the time I remember thinking, God, this is the end of the world, kind of having to drive to Waterford every day because you weren't going to leave Cork and go to Waterford to
and
live
no
there.
one from Cork wants to leave Cork and go to Waterford.
Yeah,
really,
exactly. No, that was never going to happen. But it turned out to be one of those really fortuitous steps and worked out for the best overall. So I was really delighted with that. I suppose parallel to that, I was a volunteer in Samaritans, and that became kind of a more involved role as time moved on, and I ended up as director in Cork and ultimately national director of Samaritans for a couple of years as well, all parallel to the academic role. It was all voluntary, but it was all filled with insight and into the human world and also to the business world from a managerial perspective, I suppose.
And the Samaritans thing is really interesting. So when I was doing a little bit of research, we've known each other for a while, but I need to do a little bit more research before this interview. I came across a TED talk that you did in UCC a number of years ago, and you came up with a quote which I thought was actually quite thoughtful and quite powerful. And what you basically said was, I've met some exceptional, inspirational people, many of whom were at 3 o'clock in the morning and to which I cannot attach a name. And obviously you were on the end of the phone working for Samaritans and you were talking to people who were very, very distressed in that particular situation. So how do you move from a situation where obviously you're a very, very conscious guy and socially conscious guy, and now you're the head of marketing international business, and how do you kind of instruct or guide the lecturers in CIT that, we need to, I suppose, educate our students to get jobs? Unfortunately, nowadays in marketing, jobs involve manipulation, persuasion, and how do we balance that act of we want to get these guys jobs, but at the same time, we want to create really, really conscious, good citizens as well?
Yeah, so the thing I gained from Samaritans probably more than anything else was perspective. I think I, like most people, at times when I think you have it bad, and then you see sometimes what other people put up with. You see people getting to the bottom of the barrel and still somehow managing to crawl their way back out. And that to me is kind of maybe something of what I try to apply to what I'm doing every day now in CIT in my role as head of marketing and international business. For me, the essence of education is really about two things. One is confidence. The other thing is open-mindedness, and it's that sense of perspective is what can help you with the confidence piece. The ability to know what you know what you don't know, and figure out that there's a gap in between that's bridgeable if you put enough effort into it. And with our team at CIT, that's the kind of approach we try to inculcate basically across the board. The other thing, I suppose, that I mentioned there in terms of open-mindedness, you in Samaritans, again, I found often my own life beliefs being challenged. And one of the areas that I found it most challenging was working in prisons. We used to offer a listening support service in prisons. I remember one day, being up in Mountjoy, I was being taken around by the governor of Mountjoy just to see the prison because of the work we were doing. I remember him pointing to one guy who looked to be about 19, and he explained that guy's grandmother would normally come in to visit him on a Tuesday because his mother was addicted to heroin and was getting a methadone fix. But on this particular Tuesday that I was in there, his grandmother wasn't able to come in either because she herself had become addicted to heroin. And I just said, well, that guy has no opportunity in the world to be anywhere other than where he is. And to me, education is about opportunity. It's about putting a hand on someone's shoulder and shoving them up the stairs to get them to somewhere better or whatever. Education is transformative. It's the only thing, well, it's one of the few things that can change people's prospects and direction in life. So that's kind of the philosophy, I think, that underpins the whole lot of it.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, something really, really interesting there, and that education is very much about confidence and giving people the confidence. I think that's so important, particularly nowadays in an area of tech where the world has ever more increasing challenges and problems, and yet to overcome those challenges, we need innovative solutions. And the only way that you come up with innovative solutions is that if we take risks, and the people who are going to be most willing to take risks and maybe start businesses to do good or do different things are ultimately students.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, at a fundamental level, if you take something like marketing has changed so much even in the last 10 years that if we're training just people to know things, if we're educating people just to know things, then that knowledge is going to be out of date very quickly. So you have to, I suppose, position people so that they can develop their own ability to learn and grow and develop as needed and to evolve with the situation around them that's changing. So again, I think that's an important part of what we do, at least, and what we try to do.
And do you think students are actually open to that? Because I feel like I had a class earlier on today and I was talking about Amazon, big tech, don't pay their taxes, damage they're doing. We'll get into that in a little bit more in a while, in a minute. But one student came up to me afterwards and I wanted him to write a critical essay on the role of big tech. Is it a net positive? Is it a net negative? What are the different variances and variables that go on here? And he came up to me after the class and he said, well, sure, I'm going to be working in it anyway. I can't do anything about it. So there's no point in me really understanding or knowing any of this stuff. And at one point I'm kind of thinking, okay, my heart kind of sank a small. But at the same time, you have to see it from the student's perspective. And how do we bridge that gap between really teaching them to be critical thinkers about the world that they want to live in versus, again, just having those skills that will get them into their entry-role job?
It's funny, you know, I often say this, that I think we, people who are older, I'm 40, you're touching it, I think.
I wish I was, no.
But, we forget how little we knew when we were 21 and 22.
Yeah.
We forget how narrow our life experience is at that stage. So we're looking back at it from a lens of having developed our knowledge and experience that a little bit more broadly.
Yeah.
But you'd be surprised how narrow-minded some of our opinions were at that stage in our life. So I'd kind of couch some of those opinions a little bit in that surroundings, perhaps.
For the record, I'm 28, by the way, just the camera knows that. So I suppose then, bringing that conversation on just a small bit, so as a regional director for Samaritans, you'd be acutely aware of the kind of impending, or possibly we're in the middle of a kind of mental health crisis that we're in at the moment, particularly amongst young people. And I was doing some reading during the week on a number of studies, and Dr. Yvonne Kelly from the University College London basically demonstrating in her study in 2018 that there's a clear link between the depressive symptoms of low self-esteem, lack of sleep, disengagement, and the amount that people engage with social media, particularly when we're talking about kind of young teen boys and young teen girls. Is there any net benefit to tech in society at the moment, and how much damage are firms like Facebook and Google doing to particularly kids, I suppose, at the moment?
Yeah, so I suppose, look, it's a very complicated topic, and anything to do with suicide prevention is complicated as well. I should say I haven't been involved in Samaritans in a number of years, but at the time that I was involved, we were beginning to see the effects of that the kind of envy and FOMO and all those things, even before FOMO was FOMO, creeping in and impacting on people in a way that was quite different to anything that we'd seen before that. There was a sense that, you know, once upon a time you lived your own life and you had a sense of the people's lives around you, and it was probably not all that sanitized because you were there and you're down and dirty with those people. Whereas now you're getting that sanitized version of other people's lives that's not even remotely accurate. And even with the best will in the world, you're always trying to live up to that because that's human nature. We're aspirational in nature. And because technology allows that to come at you from many different directions, 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. There's no escape. The impact on mental health then is obvious. It's people being holding themselves to a standard that A isn't real and B isn't achievable. And that to me is probably the biggest societal challenge that we're going to face ever. I think it's going to have profound impacts over the period of the next 10 years unless something changes. And this, maybe coming back a little bit to your question, tech companies have a responsibility to do what they do more responsibly. Where to start though is the thing, and who's going to start being more responsible, knowing that it'll probably just cut them out of the market that they're so anxious to have. It's really complicated mess, but we have to start agitating and arguing for that, those of us that are in positions of leadership or in positions of influence, I think, you know.
And I don't think, like in reality, I think we're all kind of succumbed to the fact that this is not going to be a consumer-led revolution. This revolution has to come from either the political and the lawmaking side, or it's going to come from the tech companies. But I mean, just to read out just a couple of stats, because I think this is important for people to know, and they probably wouldn't know these stats. So, in the United States, over the last kind of 10 years or so, the amount of instances in self-harm in teenage girls has risen. With the age group aged 10 to 14, it's gone up 189%, and with the age group from 15 to 19, it's gone up 62%, and that's just since 2009. There's a clear correlation between that and when these kids started using social media. Now, you would think that someone like a Mark Zuckerberg or Facebook would turn around and say, okay, we need to do something with this platform. It is clearly doing damage to teen girls, teen lads, whatever the case may be. And yet their response in the United States was, let's release Messenger for kids, which is essentially acts as a gateway drug, getting you onto these social media platforms where you need this constant reciprocity and constant social affirmation of what you're doing, to the point whereby 100 likes from 100 people you don't know is more important to you than a compliment from a genuine friend. So, indeed. I mean, if this is a reaction of Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, we can't really be relying on the tech companies to make these fundamental decisions that are really tearing apart the fabric of society in many ways.
Yeah, look, if you're looking to capitalism for solutions to issues like that are going to impede on the bottom line, then you're not going to find them. That's not an anti-capitalist stance, but their jobs ultimately is to make money, and they can dress up mission statements and whole sorts of flowery language, but ultimately they're shareholders to keep happy. Yeah. So to me, this political leadership is what's needed. And when you look at political leadership when it comes to the tech companies, there's, I suppose, a lot of countries are reliant on them for employment and so on like that. But I think more particularly in relation to Facebook, their power of influence over political narratives is starting to sway politicians against taking action against the likes of Facebook. So, for example, Trump isn't going to act against Facebook. He pretty much knows he's been elected on the basis of fake news and so on, which is propagated primarily through the likes of Facebook and other media as well. So he's not going to take action. Boris Johnson isn't going to do it in the UK because it allows him to target people in Putney that he can say and give a precise message to when he's running against Labour and frighten them off against Jeremy Corbyn and so on. So to them, to nefarious minds, perhaps, technology is a tool. There's bad sides with it, but for them, for people in power, there's good sides with it, and they're going to turn a blind eye because it allows them to meet their own ends as they need at the moment. You know, no. There is still scope to do things around Facebook. Age limits and things like that need to be considered, I think, and other social media companies. And you need to be careful about how they're rolled out because, you know, you can have the long arm of the state as well, kind of interfering and so on. And there's ways around these things, but it's hugely complicated. But the key thing for me is political leadership is what's missing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, I mean, because I'm not saying that, to be fair to some companies out there, they have started to take action. Like Twitter recently enough, Jack Dorsey announced that they're not going to have any political advertising during the next presidential election. So it is possible, and I know Sheryl Sandberg or Mark Zuckerberg hide behind this idea of, well, we don't want to curb free speech. Now, of course, there's a big difference with free speech when it's essentially on acid, targeted to people who are uneducated about certain topics, and they're being fed basically fake news constantly. And I think that's something that absolutely, I think you're right, politicians need to take a better stance. But even in terms of, like, we're talking about US politics, and again, the most powerful man in the world, Donald Trump, or one of the most powerful people in the world, we have a general election coming up soon enough. or after this goes out, whichever happens first. But in that particular scenario, should there be a debate in Ireland about the role of tech as well? Like, there's no doubt we are heavily reliant on tech companies here. Apple do great work hiring people here. There's no doubt that tech companies have had a great impact on my life. My dad's been working out in EMC for years, basically paid for my college education. So even though they are probably a net positive for Ireland in terms of economic well-being, is there something that we have to have a conversation about with these companies who have their headquarters in Ireland as well?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I grew up in the 80s on a sheep farm, right? And there was 8 of us in the family in total. The notion that we'd be working for the types of organisations we are now was kind of fanciful, to be quite honest, because there just wasn't those opportunities back then. You had Fords and Dunlops leaving, Cork, just as an example. And what replaced them, although it was maybe 15 to 20 years later, were the likes of Apple and other companies that are here now. That's a good thing. There's no two ways about it. It's great that we have employment. It's great that we're able to give people opportunities and so on. I suppose the big question around all that is corporation tax, and I don't have a strong opinion on that. I think you should be able to be flexible around your taxation policies as a nation, and I suppose you should be able to support the development of a workforce and reach what you need to in order to be able to provide people with a living. So tech is good in terms of employment and so on. But tech, and we started the conversation talking about artificial intelligence. It can't have unrelenting, unbounded power. There has to be some element of ethics, if nothing else, meshed into the whole thing in order to kind of say, this is where this should be at, and we shouldn't really be going any further. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something, in essence. It's a rambling answer to a kind of a complicated question, but at the heart of it, tech companies good, technology good, but we need to be careful.
Yeah, I think that's right. And again, it goes back to your point about political leadership. It's funny when we're talking about taxation and things like this, and I give out anyway, about a lot of these companies paying no tax in Ireland, even though they are a net benefit in terms of employment, things like that. But yet, if we look at the recent HQ2 debacle with Amazon in New York, New York were willing to offer Amazon $1.3 billion, and Amazon demanded $1.3 billion in tax subsidies over 10 years to build HQ2 in New York. Now, to me, a company that earns, or that is worth and has a market capitalization of $1 trillion, or it's probably over $1 trillion now, should not be taking money out of police departments, homeless shelters, all of these kind of good things that communities need, and instead lining the pockets of someone like Jeff Bezos. I think that is morally and fundamentally wrong. So do you think that because, and you mentioned it before, those corporate lobbyists, and I think I read somewhere there's more corporate lobbyists than there are journalists actually now in New York at the moment, or at least working for the big newspapers. Do you think this is a fundamental issue that needs to be kind of tackled, I suppose?
Oh yeah, there's certainly truth in that. I think Amazon in the end relented and went forgoed the tax incentives. And it shows that when you do stand up, that there are other competitive advantages that places, locations have that they can use to attract tech companies and employment that come with it. I have a PhD student at the moment who's looking at lobbying actually, but the impact of social media and lobbying and so on in Germany. And there's some interesting stuff emerging from that, but it's linked in entirely with the consumption of things like Facebook and Twitter, primarily those two, to be quite honest. It's impossible to separate what we're doing as consumers on our Facebook app and what's happening politically when it comes to motivating or moving or trying to shove the boundaries of decision making when it comes to corporations and other types of organisations.
When we go back to the PhD student, that seems like a really, really interesting topic. And obviously, look, UCC, CIT, we're both renowned for our good teaching, but also research is fundamentally important to the existence of both institutions. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the studies going on in CIT at the moment?
Yeah, so I suppose in terms of CIT, I'm there 6.5 years as head of marketing. I established the Department of Marketing and International Business with about 200 students, or up to about 850 per year now at the moment. And it's always pointed me to the fact that there's an appetite for doing things innovatively and students responding to the same. So that's been, I suppose, a success story of sorts. Parallel to that, though, I suppose we've started to put increased emphasis on research. Yourselves, UCC would always have had quite a strong output there over many years, and it's really something to be admired. For ourselves, we are moving towards the technological university designation in the next while. With that, we're going to have a focus on regionality, and that's what's going to separate, I suppose, traditional universities from the technological universities. And for me, there's kind of an impetus to develop research strands of activity so that we can contribute as much as we can to the economic development, but also to knowledge development. So I have a number of PhD students at the moment in the department, and they're working on areas from experiential marketing through to kind of marketing as a kind of a learning task within organisations, to on the other hand political lobbying through social media and that kind of thing. It's been quite interesting actually just to see what insight can be garnered when you start talking to people, correlating it and analysing it, I suppose.
And I suppose what's interesting about education is that it's one of the few areas that hasn't been disrupted in years, essentially. So what do you think then about some corporations like your Apples, your Amazons, actually creating their own universities, and what that might mean for kind of the critical thinking skills or society going forward, when you've got these corporations who I believe should be held to account by the thought leaders and business leaders of the future, coming from CIT, coming from UCC, and yet at the same time we're in a kind of a situation where if you're being trained solely through the ideological lens of an Apple or an Amazon or a Facebook, you're obviously not going to be looking at it from that critical kind of lens. So what do you think about those kind of developments?
I suppose wherever learning is happening, that's a good thing, okay? However, we need to distinguish between training and education. And one is temporary in a way. Point. One is about long-term and about learning to learn as much as anything else, kind of like I was saying at the start. So for me, it's not necessarily a bad thing. What universities have to get better at is at taking that learning, formalising it into kind of overarching qualifications in some way or other to suit learners in terms of where they're at now. So we've had a tendency over the years to offer things to potential students and they can take it or leave it. I don't think that's going to be good enough going forward. I think that's where the big disruption in education is going to come. You're going to come with a catalogue of training and experience and maybe add to that and package it as your own kind of degree in due course. And you can kind of do versions of that in places. Very interesting thing I worked on over the course of the last 2 years was in relation to pilots. So pilots are highly trained. If you can turn a plane that's upside down the right way up, you know
You're more skilled than me anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know a thing or two. But very often the training that pilots do isn't packaged into a degree or anything like that. And 9 times out of 10, when you become a pilot, you do so at 18 or 19. You pay about 100 grand to become a pilot. You then pay an onboarding fee to an airline, although that has changed a little bit. And then you go off and learn to fly. You're never in one place at any point in time. Your life is kind of in the air and traveling from A to B and C and D and back again. And so the opportunity to come back when you're 30 and do a degree is almost impossible. And there's two, you'd ask yourself, why would I? I've done all this learning, why should I start again? So we developed a degree which is a Bachelor of Arts Honours in International Business with Aviation Studies. The title is long, but it works. And what we've done is we've tried to recognise the pilot's training, so they're as the equivalent of 2 years of a degree, and we deliver online modules on business on top of that to allow them to learn while they fly. Well, not literally, but pretty much, so it allows them to diversify, allows them maybe to prepare themselves for senior leadership roles within their organisations and so on. And to me, that kind of thing is the future, where you take where people are at, recognise their learning, add to it in some way or other, and bind it together in some sort of qualification. And that's where I'd see places like Apple and others feeding into what we're doing. But I'm giving you all my trade secrets there, Dave.
That's all right. This is broadcast, so you're going to be telling everyone else as well, somehow or another. But anyway, but just to wrap up then, so we start off talking about artificial intelligence, AI, spoken about the ethics of it. Where's it going next? What's the next big thing in terms of marketing, in terms of international business? Where is the impact of AI going to be? Is there going to be a point where we say stop, or is this kind of a roller coaster that is not going to stop at this point?
That's what I worry about. I worry that we're on that roller coaster and there's no end to that roller coaster. The biggest problem in relation to artificial intelligence is a bit like everything else that's happening in the world. It's a little bit bad at the moment, whether it's fake news or disinformation and whatever else, is that critical faculties aren't being employed fully. I saw someone share something on Facebook this morning. It made a reference to 11 suicides in Cork and Kerry in the last 2 days in relation to home repossessions. I don't think that could be true, right? Just crunching numbers on it and so on like that. Plus, you couldn't possibly know why anyone took their own lives. It's a version of fake news, but it was being circulated on social media as if it was true. And this is being done by adults. So if adults and grown-ups aren't asking themselves, is this true or is this false, then we have very little hope. And in a similar fashion, when it comes to things like AI, we need people who are in business leadership and in technology leadership and in education leadership to stand back and say, I need to understand what this is. Because most people you'd ask don't have a clue. And they don't have a clue of its potential, they don't have a clue of its danger, they don't have a clue of what it might bring to the world. But you have a responsibility to find out. You have a responsibility to stand back and say, okay, when they're talking about AI and data mining and all these things that come with it, I need to be able to say and explain what it is so as I can see the impact for not just my business, but for life as well, and form a position on it. This is industrialization in a different form, coming down the tracks. We have to have an opinion.
And I suppose that comes back to the core facet, again, just to come full circle. As educators, we're not just looking to get people possibly into the workplace, but we're also looking to create the conscientious managers of the future or business leaders of the future who are going to approach these challenges with that sort of social mindset and with that kind of critical lens which we're going to need going into the future.
Yeah, like work is work, tech is tech, business is business. But at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is life and death. And you have to kind of be able to focus on life in particular. And life is rounded, life is messy, life is grey. We have to, I think, take that focus that we are talking about here and apply it to life, and everyone will be far happier and more content then.
I think that's a good way to wrap it up. Thanks very much, Pio.
Cheers, Dave. Thank you.